So something that I hear a lot from landlords is, Ernie, how do I get or keep really great tenants? I have so few of them or none at all. I want to know what I can do differently to change my landlording business. If that's you, if you need some tips or advice on how to get or keep really great tenants, you're going to want to stick with us all the way to the end of the video. I'm going to give you everything I can so that you can transform your landlording business by getting and keeping the best tenants. Let's get started. Now, it's easy to think that, well, I'll just get a bunch of great tenants and that'll totally revolutionize my business. But it's really not that simple, because finding great people is actually easier than you think. In fact, you may already have a perfectly good tenant right in your rental property. But if you're not doing some of these things that I'm about to share with you, then you may not be getting the best out of those tenants. You may find yourself actually losing money or losing out on a great opportunity with a long-term tenant because of the way that you're handling the situation. If you don't have these tools or tips already in practice with you, I want you again to evaluate all of them and see which of them you can begin to utilize to improve your landlording business. Now, you know that I spend a lot of time teaching landlords about the screening process. I think many of a landlord's problems and many of the benefits that you derive from your tenants can be discovered right at the beginning of the process. During that screening time, you're going to be able to see who's out there, and you'll be able to see some of these things before they ever come to your property as people you want to avoid or people that you really want to go after. Essentially, what you need to have are standards. And I don't mean a general or a vague idea of what a good tenant is like. I want you to really think about it. Have in mind what your precisely ideal, perfect tenant looks like. Consider your property, consider your market area, consider the kinds of tenants you've had in the past that you've really had. Or if you're brand new to the game, think about in your mind, what are the qualifications or the qualities and the kind of person you want renting your property? One really great way for you to frame, both for your prospective tenants, but also for yourself, is something I like to call the tenant scorecard. This card I've developed as a mechanism for you deciding what those qualities are. I used to be a public school teacher, and naturally when you grade an assignment, you grade it on a particular scale. To make it easy, your tenant scorecard can go from 0 to 100, and you decide the things that are the most important. But you have to think about these qualities and these aspects that have to do with landlording that you believe are important in your ideal tenant. Then you'll rank all prospective tenants according to this scale, and you're going to determine what equals a passing score. If, for example, a person's criminal history isn't quite as important to you as their credit score or their rental history or perhaps their employment, you're going to determine by an actual number value what each of these is worth to you in the ideal, and then score every prospective tenant in some fair mechanism for you determining whether or not they suit your picture of an ideal tenant. So something that a lot of landlords do is something I call pre-screening. Many of you already do something like this, where you upfront tell your prospective tenants, these are the qualities I'm looking for. If you've already come up with a tenant scorecard and are not otherwise sharing this with prospective tenants upfront, I think you're just giving yourself extra work and making it difficult for someone to know really what it's going to take to qualify for your rental. If you've already determined what you're looking for in an ideal tenant, broadcast that to prospective tenants. You may find that many tenants who otherwise would have applied are simply going to pass you by because they see they don't meet these standards. And finally, as a way of finding and keeping great tenants, make sure that you understand what your deal breakers are. If there are certain qualities or aspects about a prospective tenant that you know are an automatic no, put it out there. Make sure they know it. Make sure you know it well. And don't cave in when somebody is otherwise pretty good, but they've got one of these deal breakers that you know in your heart isn't going to cut it. It might be their eviction history. It might be a short-term work history that makes you nervous about pursuing this particular tenant. If it's a deal breaker for you, don't concede the deal breakers. If there's wiggle room and gray area on some of these criteria, that's fine. But if you've got a deal breaker in front of you, don't ignore it. By the way, I want to thank you for watching this channel. One thing you can do for me to show me that you appreciate what you get out of my content is to give us a like or put a comment down below. Maybe subscribe if you haven't done that already. In any case, thanks a bunch for watching. Well, let's say that the prospective tenant has passed the test, or you find yourself evaluating your tenant in the middle of the tenancy. There are still plenty of things you can do right now in the middle of the lease term that can get the best out of each and every one of your tenants. One extremely important thing that you can do right now is make sure you know and understand your lease. Are there provisions in the lease that you simply don't get? Are there parts of it that you don't use because you've never tried, or you really don't understand the consequences of the use? Is part of your lease so unfamiliar to you that you're not even sure if it passes state law? If any of these things are true, you probably need to sit down with somebody far more advanced than you, someone with many more doors and many more years of experience, possibly a real estate attorney, someone who can answer these questions for you so that you know you have a rock solid understanding of your lease and that you know that you're using a great lease for moving forward with each of your tenancies. With a great lease in hand, you next need a plan for enforcement. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you may have heard me refer to the 1-3-7 plan. It's a simple philosophy of how defaults should be treated in any tenancy. If you want the best out of your tenants, you're going to want to have a plan in place. My plan says you forgive one violation every 12 months. Now, it's not a matter of you must, but that's the maximum you'll do. If you have a repeat offender, that's a problem and probably someone who doesn't meet your ideal. Next, if you've got 3 strikes, especially early on, 3 violations of the lease, 3 times that they paid late, or 3 different things they did contrary to their agreement, you probably have someone you're going to want to issue a notice to vacate to, because 3 strikes, especially early on in the lease term, is way too many to meet your ideal standard. And finally, the 7. If you've gone 7 days without receiving rent, you know that it's time to move forward with a notice to vacate and begin the eviction process. By having a plan in place, you're likeliest to get the most out of your tenant. And if they are aware of your plan, you're likelier to find that they will follow based on this plan. It's not enough to have a plan, you also have to enforce it. And one of the best ways for you to enforce your 137 or whatever other plan you have for enforcement of lease violations is to document each violation with written notice. Make sure that when your tenant steps out of line and violates the lease in any way that you are issuing written notice, it's not enough for you to pick up the phone or to send them a text. You're going to want to prepare a file where you can input written notice and be able to prove, in the event that you ever have to show up to a court, that you gave notice after notice after notice. A court doesn't like issuing an eviction when there's a single violation of the lease that doesn't have to do with non-payment of rent. But if you've had to remind a tenant multiple times throughout the year to do or to stop doing something, even if they're paying rent, a tenant who continually and habitually violates the lease is probably someone you're going to move on from, and someone who does not meet your ideal. Your records are essential to be able to prove to the court that this is someone who the court should remove and should sign an order of eviction for. And when you found that gem, naturally you want to stand and applaud. It's good to show people that you appreciate them. And I'm going to give you 3 ways that you can do that in an effort to keep really, really great tenants. Well, first of all, when you've identified someone who meets that ideal and you know that this is someone you would want for another 12 months, possibly another couple of years, what you're going to want to do as your lease comes to an end is you're going to want to prepare a new lease. Don't just presume that keeping them on a month-to-month basis is good enough. If there's someone that you like, someone that you trust with your property, issue them a new lease with a full term. If yours is a 12-month term or an 18 or 24, you want to lock them in because there's someone who you can trust and you can trust to pay that rent and to follow those rules. Somebody like that is pure gold and worth pursuing. Prepare a new lease, send it to them, and hopefully get them signed for another term. One way you might convince that tenant to stay is by showing your appreciation. Little indications of your gratitude go a long way. Maybe you give something at the end of the year or at Christmas time. Maybe you know, because you probably should, their birthday, and you send them a card. You find a way to show appreciation to the tenants that you know you are courting for a long-term relationship. Find creative ways. They don't have to be expensive, but they should express clearly your appreciation for this tenant. Do this early and often, and you might just turn around some mediocre tenant and establish a long-term, very positive relationship by the way you show your appreciation. And finally, if you've had someone for an extended period of time who enjoys your property, who has been there, it's possible that you've established a pretty good communication relationship with that tenant. If that's the case, you may just straight up ask them, hey, what is it that you really, really like about this place? What is it, if anything, that I could do better? By getting feedback from a really great tenant, you might actually find ways to improve your game further. You may be unaware of things that could actually have made things even better for them. And by opening this pathway to communication, you're going to make things better for yourself and future tenants through your landlording business. Remember that it's not just one thing. You need a set of high standards for your ideal tenant to meet. You need to be able to stand firmly on your lease. And finally, when you recognize that you've got a really awesome tenant, it's time to stand up and applaud that awesomeness, because I guarantee you it'll go a long way to building and sustaining a great landlording business. For even more ideas on what you can do to improve what you do as a landlord and really, really grow your landlording business, this video right here appears to Google and YouTube to be the perfect thing for you to watch next. I strongly recommend that you do that. And until next time, landlords, happy leasing.